Hey guys, and welcome back to part 2 of building the Quakertown and Southern. I hope you guys are doing well as we get this new year underway, now 2 to 3 weeks in. I'm saying 2 to 3 weeks because obviously I don't all record this in one day. In fact, the footage for this one was recorded over the course of about 3 days. As you can see, we are currently still working on some of the scenery kind of in the Hatfield area of the line. Between Hatfield and Souderton, more towards the Hatfield side. In fact, you can catch a glimpse occasionally of the Hatfield station. And we're still kind of putting in trees and using that acid block. But I do want to start off, apart from that, by saying that you will notice a fair amount of progress that was either not shown or that has been done since this video went live. If you're familiar with the workshop route, link in the description. And the reason is, I don't always record when I work on the route. Either A, I'm just not in the mood to, or B, I just don't have the time to. And, sometimes I just sometimes I just forget. And so you will notice some differences. You might be like, oh, hey, like these changes have been on the route for like the last 2 weeks, or some changes you didn't show. Well, what's the reason? The reason is I either forgot to record or I just didn't. And, I'll try and do better with that in the future. But if you always want the most up-to-date version of the route, don't wait for the video to come out. Always, subscribe to the route on Workshop, and you'll get those updates automatically. And that way, for a fact that you have the latest version. That's actually one of the upsides of using Steam-only content and the Steam Workshop. It is those updates, as soon as I publish them, are live to you guys. So that's kind of nice. I know people are like, well, the Steam stuff isn't as high quality. You can get better stuff for cheaper, third party, and I understand that. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I want to be able to have this route available to the most amount of people, and the most amount of people tend to be like me, where we only buy the stuff we see on Steam. Doesn't mean I don't have third-party stuff. I have a couple RDCs, I have a couple Steam engines, and things of that nature that definitely did not come from Steam. But I don't want to use those in this route, because then all of a sudden somebody doesn't have it and doesn't feel comfortable getting it, and then they can't enjoy the route and complain. So I'm just trying to make sure the most amount of people can enjoy it. Another update I want to bring you is I'm starting to realize that some of the DLC I included that I wanted to replace generally can't be replaced. You may have noticed in some of the updates that I made it that the Miami route was not going to be removed anytime soon. The main reason is the engine house in Quakertown is I have that based from the Miami assets, and I was hoping I could use the New York New Haven assets instead. The problem is the New York New Haven assets have an overhang kind of carport looking thing with it, whereas the Miami assets don't. And I could make it work, but it just doesn't look as good. It's not looking like the way I want it to. So it's kind of the reason for that. So I just ask that you keep that in mind as you're kind of looking through this. I do hope you're enjoying the route. And now you may notice we're now back in Quakertown. We're now working on some of the industries north of Quakertown. You may notice I don't have any ballast on some of the sidings. And the reason I don't want any ballast on the sidings at the moment is I want to get all these bushes and trees in place before I lay it down. That way it kind of looks a little better, and I'm not struggling to kind of find holes and fill it in later. Later on, actually up in a little bit south of the Quakertown station, you're going to notice we're going to be putting in a river. Well, not really a river, more of a creek. And I'll be going kind of through the basics of how I did that. But also, please note, it's definitely not done yet. As with the entire route. You can see multiple dead areas in this video alone. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also, and you may notice this later, I do try and take into account as much data as I can from Google Maps, from the terrain elevation. The terrain elevation was imported from a DEM file, so I try to take that into account, but I also take into account some changes that Google Maps may not be aware of. I actually ended up looking on the public property map and realizing that some of the property I was intending to use as railroad property wasn't able to be used as such. So you may have noticed there's a couple sidings that have moved, some track panels that have moved because of that. That's because I just kind of want to get the feel of this right. This route is by no means going to be 100% accurate. It probably will never be 100% accurate. But I wanted it to at least feel right, and it didn't entirely feel right if I had stuff in places where it shouldn't have been. Because that's, well, one, that be kind of illegal, and two, it just doesn't feel right. Again, fictional route, fictional universe, legality's kind of not taken into account, but when you're going for a certain field, you kind of need to. Right now, you actually see me messing around with the elevation of a chain link fence, and what I failed to realize is right there, some of the gradients weren't entire, because of the way Train Sim does gradients. When you adjust the height of things, it's not sometimes easily or cleanly doable because of the way the gradients lay out. So I end up going through and selecting all the panels of that fence and, doing it all at once. And it actually ended up looking pretty darn good. Much like the fence, I'm actually really proud of this particular little industrial area. It's not done by any means, but I think it's looking good. You see me adding a fence here. You also, I don't know if later on in the video, but at some point, either between this recording and the next recording, or after the next recording, I ended up adding in some sidings that I knew were there, but I was on the fence on including because I know they're not used anymore. But I figured better to include them than to not, and they're actually a little bit north of this location, just before the line severed, around milepost 18. So if you're on the actual version of the route, you may notice that. I will be likely doing a full route tour around episode 5, and kind of running a timetabled run of the route during that episode. So that episode actually may be a little longer than this one, or any of the normal ones, so be on the lookout for that. And you'll kind of see a lot of the highlights of the route in that nature. Now, this is where you see me adding some bridges, and trying to get that creek in. I probably should have done this creek, quite honestly, before I started doing any of this hearing. Because when you're using these irregular asset blocks and have these bushes everywhere, it gets in the way. And that's a recommendation I would wholeheartedly admit. If you know there's going to be a bridge and there's going to be a creek somewhere, make sure you don't put any scenery there until you have that bridge and creek or river there. Otherwise, it will become a pain to put in, and you'll kind of be ripping your hair out trying to get it right, trying to make sure things line up correctly. You notice I'm using Google Maps to try and get things to line up, using the elevation tool, kind of adjusting things, and so that way flat areas that are supposed to be flat are, and things of that nature, and just trying to figure it out. Now you notice you probably just saw there was some floating trees. Because of the way asset blocks work, all you have to do is move one of the nodes a little bit and it actually readjusts the elevation of everything. So that's actually not hard to correct, but when you're trying to place down water, it's definitely hard to click where you need to click because of where things are. There was another creek slightly to the north of Quakertown that I did this on before doing it for camera, and I had the same exact problem. And so that's a lesson learned. Make sure you do water before anything else. You also notice I removed the ballast. That way it looked a lot better because you don't have ballast in water, hopefully. And now you see me trying to place water. I always try to use the water reflective tool. The main reason is it reflects on everything that isn't a loft. Okay, so these trees in the asset block, it will reflect those. The bridges, the bushes, it will reflect those. But it will not reflect a loft. It will reflect the track, but if you're using like a bridge loft or an embankment, it will not reflect it. And that's actually one of the main reasons why when I have gradients, I don't like using embankments. I like actually snapping the terrain to the track if I can, because then it actually reflects in the water and looks, in my opinion, more realistic, even though if it is a little more temperamental to work with. And you just see me kind of positioning things, getting everything right, adjusting the ground again to make sure there's no like little ponds, because it is supposed to be a creek, it is supposed to flow. And you also notice I'm hitting F2 quite a bit, because that's always a good thing. And that's pretty much kind of it for this week, guys. As we wrap it up, I hope you have another great week, and I hope to see you next time. Again, links in the description for the route and where to find it, as well as for Train Sim. If you like the video, give it a like if you feel inclined, subscribe for more, and hope to see you guys next week.